Welcome to the Millionaire University Podcast. I'm your host, Brien Gearin, with you today. And on this edition of the MU Pod, I'm joined by our friend of the show, Chris Hillier. He's back for another go. He is a longtime entrepreneur and adjunct professor at the University of Denver, teaching entrepreneurship, shocking, through acquisition, which is really cool. And if you haven't checked out our previous episode with Chris, go do that now. That was a really fun one talking about basically buying businesses. So that one was super awesome. But Chris has also started a brokerage firm, consulting firm. He also worked in employee wellness, started a company there. The man has multiple experiences in entrepreneurship. So, Chris, man, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Awesome to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I'm excited because we're going to talk about something different that you're also an expert in. In fact, you wrote a book on it. We're going to be talking about time management for entrepreneurs, and even if you're not yet an entrepreneur or you're not currently an entrepreneur, this is going to be some valuable information for any civilian who's listening right now, myself included, because time management is such an important factor in our lives in which many of us struggle with, myself included. Yet again, like there's plenty of things where my time management could be improved as an entrepreneur, as a husband, a father, and just a person out there in the world. So I'm excited to dive into this topic. Chris, let's give a quick origin story for those who may have not heard your first episode with us. Tell us who you are, how you got into what you're doing in a couple minutes here, and then we're going to dive right into time management.
Sure, absolutely. In my professional life, and as you mentioned, I've kind of been a long time entrepreneurial. Always considered myself entrepreneurial, and been involved with kind of multiple different companies over the years. Some that we started, some that we acquired. But I love this topic that we're going to delve into today because I think at some point I had to learn some of these important lessons out of necessity. As I was scaling these companies. I have 5 kids today. You and I had talked a little bit about that. So during much of this time, I was actually serving as a lay pastor for my local church congregation as well, which is an unpaid volunteer position in our church, but still demands a lot of time and attention. So I feel like just kind of the makeup of the things that I've been involved in have required that I get really serious about this topic of time management, and especially for entrepreneurs out there. We started our first company almost a couple decades ago now, and I know what it's like to have that kind of just demand just about everything you have to give it. And trying to balance the other aspects of your life when the business can kind of take it all out of you. So anyways, that's kind of my background in a nutshell, and what led me to ultimately write the book I did. It's about time, and just be really passionate about the topic and do what I can to help others along their journey as well.
And we're about abundance here. What's the name of that book?
It's about time. Use time to create a more meaningful life. There's a copy of it right
Okay.
there.
I love it. Can our listeners grab that anywhere books are sold?
Anywhere books are sold. Yeah, you can check
All
it
right.
out. Christopher S. Hillier. It's about time. Hope it's something that would provide value to some of the listeners who are out there.
Okay, I love it. So let's dive in and talk about It's About Time and what you write about in there and about time management in general. One point you made in your preamble there was when you're a parent and time management, and when you said when you're a lay pastor, there's things that are inside our business and there are many more things that are outside of our business. I know as a parent of 4, my time is just drawn in a million different directions between my business, the ventures I'm a part of, and my family and my church and other things that we are a part of. Like tonight, I've got my kids' first t-ball practice and I'm the head coach. I was literally on the phone with my wife before we got on this, Chris. And I was like, honey, how do I teach 5-year-olds baseball? Because I used to teach 17 and 18-year-olds baseball. Now I'm teaching 5-year-olds. I have to figure that out. So these are all things that you have to be able to develop a system to give yourself time, almost buy back your time, so that you can do everything to the full extent of what you feel you can do it at, right? We want to give everybody everything we have at all times, and there's a way to do this. So that's why we're talking today. So Chris, let's jump into it. One of the things I know you're big on is time blocking. What's your unique approach to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just mention too, I'm so glad you brought up your family and your kids and coaching the t-ball team, because I just think too often we become tunnel visioned, especially in our professional lives, and we forget why it is that we're doing all these things that we're doing. And it might sound cliche, but I really feel like it's important to define our purpose, define our priorities, kind of determine what is our why. And I'll just share in case it's helpful for anybody. For me personally, if you've kind of determined what your why might be, and you want to kind of test whether it's going to work for you, I found there's three questions that are super helpful. One is, does that why give you inspiration, especially when you're down and things are hard? Does that why challenge you when you feel complacent? And does that why give you direction, especially when you feel lost? Because um, things are hard. Everybody faces adversity and trials and difficulties along the way, and oftentimes it's kind of that why that's gonna drive you through. And for many of us, it's family, and I think for just about everybody, it's relationships of some kind. And so for me, that's been super, super important and super helpful to kind of just always come back to and fall back on. But as you reference time blocking, um, everyone's familiar with this topic of time management, and I think it's easy to talk about because it is so familiar. But it's been said, and I agree with this statement, that you can't really manage time, right? It doesn't need to be managed. It just is. What needs to be managed and what can be managed is ourselves, and we can manage our focus, our energy, our stress, our priorities, beliefs, habits. The list goes on, and we have to become disciplined in learning to control those things and not letting other outside influences kind of come in and control our lives. So, one of the first things that I have found helpful and that I believe anybody can do is create an awareness around their time. Um, and I think, we've all been around businesses long enough to know that we can't improve what we don't measure. And we're actually pretty poor judges. And we're pretty poor at having an accurate understanding of how it is that we use our time every single day. So this might sound tedious, but one of the things that I recommend is to create a time log and actually create this sense of awareness by looking at whatever it is, 15-minute blocks, 20-minute blocks, 30-minute blocks for at least a week or more. And have fun with it, right? Make a pie chart that shows how much time you're spending doing various things. Compare one day to the next. It's just, first and foremost, it's incredibly important, I believe, to gain an understanding of how we're currently doing. And then really before you get to the time blocking aspect of it, which again, I have found to be so beneficial in my life, but the kind of the second step I would offer up would be to make a to-do list. And this is obviously not a revolutionary or a new concept, but I'd suggest doing this at the beginning of the week, kind of the end of the prior week, the beginning of the current week. And one of the things that you want to do is get kind of everything, that list of to-dos, out of your brain and onto a physical list. Write down kind of every single thing that comes to your mind, the things you want to do, the things you have to do, the things that you feel like you should be doing. That process is incredibly liberating and freeing, because that unfinished to-do list kind of in your brain, just it leaves feelings of incompleteness, and you don't realize how much that internal list of incomplete tasks is kind of really weighing you down. So list it all out, not just work things, family things, personal things, whatever it might be. And then next, you want to kind of categorize those to dos and actually create priorities around that. One of my favorite quotes, Confucius said, "The man who chases two rabbits catches none." And if everything on that list is a priority, then at the end of the day, nothing is really a priority. And so I'll give you a simple test to know what your priorities are. If you're kind of trying to wrestle with that, look at your calendar. You don't have to tell us what your priorities, just show us your calendar. And this is where we really have to kind of walk the talk. We can't say that something's a priority if it's something that we aren't actually willing to invest our time on. If coaching your son's t-ball team is a priority for you, right? But you never make it to practice because you're constantly letting whatever else it is kind of come in and crowd that out. Then the reality is that it hasn't that it hasn't become a priority. So um, next step would be to transfer that to-do list to your calendar. And I think this is really the key to getting the most out of every part of your day. And it may feel like this is an unnecessary step, but I promise that you'll fail to get those things done if you don't schedule them into the calendar. The to-do list is great because it helps organize kind of what it is that needs to be done, but it's not necessarily going to help you in getting those things done productively. And so I've always been a fan of time blocking. If it's new for you, it might feel super restrictive. Um, but but I would tell you this is what will create freedom for you in your life, because it's not just kind of the less fun things, right, that you're going to put into your calendar and actually block time for. But it's your personal time, your family time, your leisure time, all those things that you kind of feel like you never seem to be able to find time for. All of that's going to kind of get put into the calendar. And then the key is, again, discipline to carry that action plan out and stick to the calendar and get those things done, which you kind of previously set out to do.
So the physical act of time blocking, that is the transferring of the to-do list to your calendar. So like, for example, I'll use me as an example. I know myself best. I use Post-it note brain dumps. So every day I will list out bullet points of everything I got to do. And I'll look at the Post-it note from yesterday, the things that didn't get done. They weren't listed as priorities. Those kind of get bumped to the next day until they become a priority, right? Like there are some things that this doesn't need to really be done until Thursday, and today's Monday. It's still on the list. It's just not at the top. Is that an example of time blocking where we have it listed out? And I had a mentor who kind of taught me the idea of brain dumping. He said, get a legal pad and every night put down everything in your brain, especially on like Sunday nights before your week starts, put everything in your brain and just throw it on paper, then organize it. So kind of the similar system here. Um,
Absolutely.
but the time blocking is where we're literally putting that into the calendar and organizing, whether it's anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour or more for what that task is, right?
Absolutely. And it's so powerful. But let me tell you what's going to happen again, especially if you're just kind of getting into this. Because really every hour of your day, right? Every half hour of your day should be blocked and scheduled and planned for. But what's going to happen is that, at 2 o'clock on Wednesday, when your calendar pops up and says, okay, it's time to sit down for me. I'm actually in the process of editing my second book. But anyways, when my calendar says it's time to sit down and write 1,500 words, because that was something I prioritized and that was something that I wanted to schedule, um, you're going to be sitting there and you're not always going to be feeling in the mood, right? Or ready to do that thing at 8 o'clock on Saturday when your calendar tells you that it's time to get that workout in. You're not always going to want to do it. Um, and so again, one of the keys is to stay disciplined and actually do those things. Spend the time doing those things that you previously designated as your top priorities and things that you wanted to spend those times that time doing.
So how do you avoid, and this is one of my biggest problems. I do this to a degree, the time blocking. I do it to the best I can right now, but plenty of room for improvement. And I'm sure I'm not alone with this, where I have certain tasks blocked out on my calendar, but let's say something's supposed to get done at 1 p.m. However, my developer called and we've got this problem with a new website launch, or, just emergencies pop up, like business emergency. I'm talking business emergencies. Or, my wife called and said, hey, we need to get that Kroger order in so we can get the free delivery tomorrow, right? Just stuff that comes up during the day, which for busy entrepreneurs, it can be a whole lot of stuff, especially family stuff plus entrepreneur stuff.
Yeah.
How do you find, maybe it all comes back to the discipline of this is 1 o'clock, this needs to get done at this hour. What, like, is there a secret there? Is there some sauce there that I don't know about?
Well, I mean, I think it's something we all struggle with, and absolutely, there's going to need to be some flexibility, right, and some adaptability because stuff will come up. But you're probably familiar with the old Stephen R. Covey kind of 2 by 2 matrix, where you've got urgent on one
Mhm.
axis, important on the other, and of course, um, the point of all of that is that we should spend our time doing those important things, right, and not just kind of constantly distracted by the things that feel urgent in the moment. And this whole methodology of time blocking is one of those things that I think can protect us from becoming distracted by those things that feel urgent but really aren't that important. So I think one is you can time block for them, right? Like if you know you've got a bunch of these miscellaneous errands to run and things to do, schedule time to do it. Um, but I think if you're really engaged with your calendar and those things that you've previously scheduled, a lot of these things will kind of go by the wayside, right? Or not feel so urgent or so important in those moments because you've got your priorities right and you've got your priorities set. And I've always said that if everything is always feeling urgent, and this might be in our personal lives, but it might be in our professional lives too, where it's just like, man, there's always fires to put out. There's always, these things that pop up. I think that's actually an indication in many ways that you're not properly planning and not properly kind of scheduling your days and your weeks, because so many of those types of things can be avoided by following kind of a simple process and the framework.
So I want to kind of go back to your first point of saying a really smart thing to do is create a time log. Or maybe is this kind of adjacent to like a time audit, understanding where your time actually goes on a daily basis.
Sure.
Um, how do you do that? What is the process of creating a time audit or a time log?
Yeah. So I think the most important with any of this is do what works for you. Right. And I think sometimes we get stuck in this way of thinking that it's got to be done this way or it's got to be done that way. And then it just kind of creates a stumbling block for us to actually get started and to do anything. So there's lots of ways that you can go about it. But as I mentioned, you want to get pretty granular. And so you might look at 15-minute periods of time, blocks of time. And because you're looking at such kind of short periods of time, you have to do this kind of as the day goes on, right? It's not something, generally speaking, that you can say, okay, it's been a few days, let me look back and try to remember where it is that I spent my time and what I was doing and how much of that time did I get distracted and was scrolling on Instagram or whatever the case. Like you want to do it as you go. That'll also help keep you accountable for what you're doing, because in the back of your mind, you'll start to realize like, oh, I'm going to have to account for this, right? Even if it's just to myself. And so I didn't realize, right, how often I was kind of checking Facebook and kind of watching the inbox and all these other things. Um, the other thing that I recommend is that this should be something for you. Um, I mean, do it in a way that if it was audited, right? Like you're gonna have a proper accounting, right? And you're really gonna be able to show what was going on. But I don't necessarily recommend sharing it with other people, because what happens is we start to feel pressure to um, to kind of keep our log in a way that looks impressive, right? Or looks better than it is, because we know that somebody else is going to be kind of looking over their shoulder and being aware of what's going on. This is for you, and this is a personal thing. And like I said, at least for one full week, because obviously there's a lot of kind of cycles and ebbs and flows when it comes to what goes on over the course of the week. But really, the goal and the purpose is to get a better sense of where you're spending your time, and really specifically when and where you're becoming distracted, um, because that kind of arms you, right, going into future weeks to say, okay, this was a particular time of the day or a particular task that just was difficult to stay engaged with, or a place, right, that whenever I was in this place doing this thing, it just became difficult and it just became hard. And then you can start to kind of tweak your environment and hopefully make things easier for you when you're looking to implement those changes that you want to make.
So is this something as easy as, do we just kind of go manual with it and create a spreadsheet and list out hours or time hours or half hours, whatever, throughout the day? And just, do you just catch yourself after a half hour and say, okay, for the last 32 minutes, I wrote 3 emails to clients catching up on whatever. And then for 12 minutes, I handled a phone call. And then for 18 minutes, I handled we're writing a new ad or something, whatever it might be, talking with a vendor. Is
Mhm.
literally just listing it out as you go and trying to mentally stay in the state of, okay, I need to write down what I just did.
Yeah, yeah, and use your calendar to help you, right? Set a reminder every 30 minutes, right? Like there's going to be a ding, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but just take a note or two about kind of what it is that you've been doing. How engaged, how focused you've been, and and kind of what your feelings have been, right? Those are helpful to be able to come back to. And there's tools out there, there's online resources and apps and those types of things that can be helpful. But for me, it's been as simple as you kind of explained it, right? I've got my Excel spreadsheet up, and I'm just taking notes as my day goes on.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. Is if there's got to be pieces of tech out there that are, I've heard of a few. I can't remember the name of them. There was one that seemed kind of cool. I've never used them, but I've always been curious how they work. I don't know if they just track your screen or what you're doing on there or however that works. But
Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
kind of to
There's
each their own when it comes to tech.
there's lots of resources, and like I said, find something that works for you, and don't let that be kind of a hindrance, and just doing it right, getting started when it comes to managing time. Like that is one of the rules of thumb that I think is just one of the most helpful things, which is start. um,
Hmm.
and then kind of continue to improve and incrementally build from there, and find out what works best.
So I'm curious, when in your career did you realize the importance of time management?
Well, I think again, it's one of those things that's always sitting in the back of our minds, and we know is important. And honestly, in many cases, it's because we feel guilty, right? For me, I kind of got to this point where I realized that I was constantly feeling guilty when I was at work and I was working on the business. I was feeling guilty that I wasn't spending more time at home and with family and doing all those things that were important, and that I'd always said, right, these are my core values, these are my priorities, and yet I wasn't getting to those things. Um, but same thing on the flip side, right? Like if I was doing some of those things, sometimes I would feel guilty just with, I think, especially the way that we've been conditioned to be efficient, be effective, be productive. That I wasn't working on the business, right, and I was missing out on opportunities to scale the business, or acquire new customers, or kind of fine tune processes and those types of things. And so it actually was super liberating and super freeing when I started to get more intentional with the time blocking, because I had predetermined what it is that I was going to be spending my time on, because it matched with what I valued, and what my priorities were going to be. And I didn't have to feel guilty any longer, right? That was time that I had set aside for that specific activity. And I wasn't kind of wavering back and forth and trying to figure out and wonder, am I doing what I really should be doing right now? Am I spending too much time on this or not enough time on that? It started to get just a lot more clear.
Okay. So once you had businesses, multiple businesses, and then you started having a family and kids, what was it about, or I guess at what point did you realize I need to start scheduling the family stuff as well? And how did you balance that with your business? Cuz I know, especially if you're having multiple businesses, there's so much that goes on. I guess my question is, where and how did you set your boundaries?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I feel like at the end of the day, that's what this all kind of boiled down to, for me personally at least, right? Was those family relationships. And I just recently read a study. It said that on average we spend less than 5 minutes a day in actual conversation with our spouses, or our children. Hopefully all of the listeners out there here are doing better than that, But it was kind of a shocking statistic where I was like, man, how much of our time are we really setting aside and being present and giving our attention to those people and those relationships that matter most? I can share with you just a few lessons that I learned along the way. One was that there seems to be this debate about quantity versus quality time, and and I think we could all say, oh well, it's about quality time, right? Like that's really what's most important. But I'll tell you that when it comes to relationships, one of the things that I found, and especially with children, it isn't one or the other, and it isn't a matter of which is better. They go hand in hand, and with kids, quality time usually can't be planned or arranged. That's my experience. We try to kind of engineer it, right, and create these, um, you know, you know, trips or events or times where we're going to be together, and that's wonderful. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but I just started to realize that some of the most meaningful and the best moments were those when just kind of the stars aligned, and bonding with our children, with my children, just kind of happened. So we'll have more meaningful and quality experiences the more time we're willing to give someone, or the more time that we're willing to give something. And so that was one of the realizations I had, where it was like, I have to start setting that time aside, right, and making sure that's happening, not just the way I want it to, but in a with the quantity of time that I really would like to see it have as well. We talked a little bit about urgent versus important, and one of the other things that I learned, and that I realized at some point, was that very rarely will our relationships present themselves as urgent. And I realize that it might not apply to everyone out there, but you consider your relationship with a spouse, for example. I think the trap that we fall into is, because the relationship isn't presenting itself as urgent, that everything is good and fine. When the reality is that neglect is causing our relationship with the people who are most important to us to weaken. So we have to learn to put people ahead of things and schedules. And then maybe just one kind of final lesson learned when it comes to relationships, and especially those familial relationships, is, for me at least, much of my training has been geared towards efficiency, in the business world, right, and in my professional life. But efficiency should always come after effectiveness. And it's been said that being efficient is doing things right, but being effective is doing the right things. And you can't really be successful with relationships if your focus is always on being efficient, right? We've all met those people where it's like everything is just so transactional, and you can tell, right, that it's not so much about the relationship as it is about a lot of other, maybe intentions and goals. And so when it comes to our relationships, we want to focus more on being effective with those relationships than being efficient, even if that's kind of how we've been trained over the years and conditioned to manage our time. So for me, it was kind of these realizations and these lessons learned that caused me to say, you know what, I've got to think about this differently and do this differently, and make those things and those people the priority. And so when I have in my calendar that I'm going to be, for me, it's coaching my kids' hockey teams, right, or going out on a date with my wife, or doing those things that are going to keep me kind of in a good place mentally, and physically, and focusing on the needs I have myself. Like, those are as important as anything else out there, right? Those are as important as the meeting with the CEO and the board meeting. And when somebody calls up, right, or emails and says, hey, can we do this at this time, and that's what I've got scheduled and that's what I've got planned, like, no, I've got a conflict, right? I'm unavailable. And most of those things, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment, most of those other things will find a way to kind of work themselves out, right? And those opportunities will kind of present themselves at other times, and in other ways where you really can, kind of balance things and do it all.
So what does this look like in practice when you're saying you need to plan for your effective time, not efficient time? Is this like 5 o'clock hits and you leave your phone upstairs and from 5 to 9 it's family time? Or do you calendar out like from 6 to 7 we're gonna eat dinner, from 7 to 8 we're gonna go play in the front yard? Like what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, it's all those things that you just mentioned, and again, I think one of the things I'll say is that I didn't write the book, and I don't talk about the topic because I feel like I'm necessarily the expert. And again, I've learned a lot of these things the hard way, right?
Mhm.
By making mistakes and doing things wrong, and then having to kind of go back and repair relationships, right? Or figure out that I need to do things differently. um, but it's going to be different for everybody, right? Everybody's kind of season in life and situation, with work and family and whatever it might be, is going to look a little bit different. But it's about setting those priorities. And I recently was talking with a company, and they handed me a list of their top priorities, and this was like a two, almost a 3-page list of things that, like, core values and priorities. And I think we do that in our personal lives too, right? We try to say, like, all of these things can happen and all of these things are important, when the reality is that they can't. And I was recently kind of giving a talk and a presentation, and somebody asked a really good question. They said, how many priorities can you really have, right? Like, put a number on it. And it caused me to really reflect and think, I don't know that you can have more than maybe 3 to 5. um, if you try to have your list of 2 pages full of stuff, then ultimately I think you're gonna constantly be kind of struggling with making this work. And what that means is that you're gonna have to eliminate some things. And it probably goes without saying, especially being an entrepreneur or really working towards any goal, that there's gonna be sacrifices, that you have to make, and you're going to have to identify those things that are good things, they're worthy things, they're things you like to do, but you just don't have the time for, and you have to eliminate in an effort to be able to reserve that time for kind of some of these things that we've been talking about today.
That's probably a cathartic thing to do is to really sit down, list out your top 3 to 5 priorities, whether it's at more of a macro level, like these are my life priorities or my next 10 years or 5 years or my family, my business priorities, and then mesh together the ones that are the most important into those 3 or 5 things. I think it's especially these days, everybody, myself included, has a million priorities, right? And it behooves us to whittle them down so we can focus because, human beings aren't natural multitaskers. And like you said at the onset here, if you have too many priorities on your to do list, none of them are going to get done. So you've got to
Yeah.
be able to whittle it down.
Yeah, everybody's familiar with kind of the Pareto principle, right? And that, it's 20% of our efforts, or I'll say our time, that is ultimately resulting in 80% of the meaning, the purpose, the results, the outcomes, however you want to think about it. And I've always kind of thought, man, if every single year you could look at what is it that you're doing to spend your time, and identify what's that 20% that really kind of hits the mark, that's in alignment, make those your priorities, and to the best of your ability, spend 100% of your time the next year doing that 20% of things. And then constantly, right, every single year, kind of going through that same exercise, you'd be left with a schedule and with a life and with a calendar that really focuses, on the most important. And I mean, you think about it, life accumulates, and that applies to all aspects of our lives. Do our closets get more full or less full over time? What about our attic, our garage? But what about our commitments and our tasks and our to-do lists and our responsibilities? The number of meetings, the number of calls, the number of emails, they just seem to keep growing. And we have to be willing to eliminate things, or life will just begin to overflow. And when you've got that to-do list, just as an example, um, I recommend kind of putting a score to everything on that to-do list. 1 through 5 is my kind of methodology, and 5 is, this is my purpose, this is my why, this is a top priority. And there's going to be things that are ones or twos. There's going to be things that are threes or fours. Maybe they're not our most important things in life, but they're a means to an end, or they're things that are just necessary, right? Like there's those things in life that we just have to get done because we've got to get them done. And ultimately, they allow us to become the people or do the things we want to do. But then as you're time blocking, right? Like put the fives in first, put the fours in next, put the threes in next, and you're left with some stuff that I like the approach of, can it be eliminated? And if it can, eliminate it, right? If not, can it be automated? Can it be delegated? And that's really ultimately how you're going to be able to take that Pareto's principle and apply it in a useful way. Is, some of those things got to be eliminated, some of those things got to be automated, some of those things need to be delegated. I mean, I can still remember the moment in time where for me it was determining that family sports was no longer something I could do. Sorry, fantasy sports. Fantasy sports was no longer something I could do, and it was something I liked and I enjoyed, but it was like, man, I just can't fit it all in, right? And this was one of those ones or twos type thing, not one of those fours or fives, and I haven't played since. And honestly, it was maybe a hard decision at the time, but I look back and my life's not really lacking because of it. Um,
Hmm.
and for everybody, it's going to be different, right? Everybody's priority list is going to be different, and ranking is going to be different. But to get intentional and to get serious about it, I think is ultimately the message and the key.
I think one question a lot of people might have is, how do you, it's one thing to set your time and to block it, map it all out, do it the way we've discussed here. But if you're a business where, let's say you're a solopreneur or, really small business, and you are your contact with your clients, right? Like you're the person your clients contact, whether it's constantly or, half the time or some of the time, depending on what line of work you're in. How do you make sure that A, you serve your clients when they need to be served, but B, it's also serving your time? Because I could see where it'd be very easy for clients to encroach on your time because they might have a problem right now and they probably don't know your schedule. They don't care about your schedule. They just know that they have a problem that you need to solve. How do
Yeah.
you recommend handling your time blocking around client work or client inquiries, I guess?
I love that question because that describes my situation for a lot of years. And you feel that tug and that pull and that pressure, right? Because everything is kind of dependent upon you, and those clients have expectations and needs, and they're going to want you to be available, right? And they're going to want you to kind of give them what you have to give them. And so I think a few things that could be helpful. One is, I did get to the point where I had to be more. I had to be more intentional about the type of client that I wanted to work with, right? And that's a really hard thing for an entrepreneur, and especially a solo entrepreneur, right? And somebody that's just trying to get things
Hmm.
going. You want to say yes to everybody, and you want to say yes to everything, but ultimately, again, Pareto's principle, right? Like find that 20% of clientele or those customers that are driving results, right, for you, and focus on those. Don't get kind of caught in the trap of spending a lot of time with things, and with even clients and people and customers that where there's ultimately kind of not the desired level of return there. And that will evolve and change with time. You kind of look at it over time, and kind of that threshold of, who do I want to work with, who am I willing to work with, what do I want to be doing, will change. But the other piece of advice I guess I could give is, and a lot of people will ask me about, like, with the time blocking, they'll say, what if I don't know how much time to give something, right? Or how much time something's going to take, or something's going to require. And I would say, give yourself a dedicated amount of time to get something done, and then do everything within your control to get it done in that amount of time. If you just absolutely can't get it done, now you're having to start to schedule some of those things during your free time, right? Or your personal time. And that's motivation to eliminate maybe some of those distractions, or some of those those tasks or needs out there that seem to just kind of be constantly expanding. The goal in those time blocks isn't to get started on something, it's to finish something, or at least hit some meaningful milestone that you've defined in advance. Parkinson's law says that our work will expand to fill the time available for its completion. And so if you have 2 hours of work to do, but 8 hours of time to do it, more often than not, you'll spend the 8 hours, and vice versa. I think we've all had those experiences where it's like, man, I've got 8 hours of stuff to do and only 2 hours of time to do it. And somehow, some way, right, you get done what you need to get done in the 2 hours, or at least the most important part of that. And so taking that approach, even in a small business, and even in a small company, and saying, you know what, I'm gonna have to say no to certain things and certain projects and certain people. And then I'm gonna have to, sometimes good enough is good enough, right? And we all want to be really, really good at what we do. And we kind of let those perfectionistic tendencies start to creep in, and we can keep going and going and going, right? But sometimes good enough is good enough so that we can move on and get to the next task or the next customer or the next whatever it is that's important to get to.
Yeah, what is it? Perfect is the enemy of complete, or something like. There's a million ways for that phrase to go, but
Right.
get the general gist of it. And one thing I know with clients, I learned this over the years in my business, was just setting expectations before signing agreements to work together, especially when it comes around time. Like, I know in my agreements, I spell out that, um, you know, evenings and weekends are off time for the business. You are welcome to contact us during this time, but you will get a response within 24 hours. And there's also things that I do, like if I'm getting to work in the evening, so I put the kids to bed at 9 and I'm at the laptop at 10 o'clock just playing catch up. I'll schedule my emails to go out the next morning. So
Yeah.
if I'm replying to emails from that afternoon that came in at, like, a lot of times emails come in at like 5 o'clock. I'm like, okay, I'll get to this, but you're gonna get it tomorrow morning. I'll schedule it to go out in the morning. So this way it also, I don't know if this is implicative of anything at all, but I don't want people thinking that I'm working at 10 o'clock. Now, that it's not that, or not that I'm not working. They shouldn't care when I'm working. It's that when I'm available, because then if you start sending emails at 11:30 every night, let's say they do the same thing and they're working at 11:30. Now you're starting to get into like interactions at 11:30 at night, and now your boundaries have been crossed. Even though I was completing work in the evening when typically I don't want to be doing it, sometimes I have to. I will schedule it to send at 5:30 in the morning, so that it's a next day thing. So maybe that's something that works for others as well.
Yeah, I love that. And setting boundaries is so important. And it's something that we all struggle doing, especially when we're running companies or working on entrepreneurial ventures, because we care about that, right? Like, there's reason and meaning and purpose behind what we're doing, and we want to give it our all, but setting those boundaries is so important.
Right. And as an entrepreneur, you get to pick who you work with. If you're working with the right people, and it can be a journey to find out how to work with the right people, especially if you're starting out. You might, beggars can't be choosers, but as you get into it, you get to choose the people that you work with. It's not the company I choose to work with, it's the person who I'm going to be in most contact with. If they're cool, if they understand I have a family, if they understand that, it's not okay to be texting me at 2 a.m. about work stuff, then we're going to get along just fine, right? You start being able to identify who might violate those things. And over time, they get really easy to identify, and you just don't work with them. So,
Yeah.
for those who are aspiring entrepreneurs or maybe early stage entrepreneurs, you're either in the throes of that, or you will figure that out in due time. And working with the right people that respect your boundaries makes all the difference.
Yeah, really
Yeah,
define who it is that's your ideal customer, right?
right.
And you're not going to be a fit for everybody, and everybody's not going to be a fit for you, and that's okay. Again, it can be hard to turn away business or say no, or turn down opportunities, but ultimately it's that's going to allow you to in the end be most successful.
I love it. Well, Chris, we're bumping up against the clock here. I know you're a busy man, got to get moving. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge, and sharing your book. It's called About Time. You
It's
can buy
about
it wherever
time.
books are sold. It's about time.
Yeah.
Grab that book, folks, wherever books are sold. Chris, what's the best way, if there's anyone out there listening who wants to contact you or check out more of your work? What's the best way to get in touch with Chris?
Yeah, happy to connect with anybody. And LinkedIn's a great place. Christopher Hillier on LinkedIn. Happy to connect there. Also, ChristopherSHillier.com. You can learn more about the book there and get contact information on the website as well.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks again so much. This was fantastic. And as always, we value your time and knowledge.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.